It was supposed to be a simple hug. The kind of greeting you give a friend you've known for years, quick, warm, and completely innocent. That's what I told myself the first time it happened. I told myself that there was nothing more to it. Just a moment of fleeting affection, nothing to read into. But as I stood there in the office that day, my coworker's arms wrapped around me, a small whisper of doubt started to stir deep in my chest. It was the first crack in the facade of my world, a world I had trusted completely. I didn't want to feel what I felt. I couldn't, not at the time. But that hug, that brief, casual embrace, had stirred something inside me, something I couldn't quite name. A warmth, maybe, or an unspoken tension. It didn't seem odd then, not at all. After all, we were friends, and friends hug, don't they? But as the days passed, I began to notice things. Little things that I couldn't ignore. How his smile lingered a little longer when we spoke. How our conversations, once polite and casual, seemed to have an edge now. The way his hand brushed against mine when we worked together on projects. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just coincidence. But there was this unmistakable shift in the air, like a crackling current that we both pretended didn't exist. And yet, it lingered, charged with something I couldn't deny. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it grew. I had no idea how it had even happened. The lines had blurred so slowly, so insidiously, that by the time I realized where I was already in too deep. It wasn't until months later that I realized I wasn't dealing with a passing attraction. No, it was something far more dangerous, a full-blown affair that had taken hold of me without my permission. And now, I had a choice to make. That hug, which had felt so innocent in the moment, was just the beginning. Looking back, I could trace everything, the subtle shifts, the small gestures, the long glances, to that one moment of vulnerability. He had hugged me like he had hugged me 1,000 times before, but this time, something was different. Something changed in the air. Something changed between us. But I didn't see it then. I was too caught up in the day-to-day, the monotony of work and life, to notice the tiny signals, the body language, the unspoken invitations. He was just a coworker, after all. Someone I worked with, someone who was always there for me when I needed to vent about the stresses of my job. Someone I thought I could trust. And when the first kiss came, I wasn't prepared. I wasn't expecting it. It was nothing like the movies, no grand romantic gestures, no violins playing in the background. It was a sudden, quiet moment, charged with tension, one of those rare moments where time seems to stop. It happened in the parking lot after a late meeting, the both of us standing under the flickering streetlights. I had said something that had made him laugh, and before I could even register the change in the air, he was kissing me. It was soft at first. Tentative, even. A question. And I didn't pull away. I didn't stop him. Instead, I found myself responding, my body betraying me as it leaned into his touch. The kiss deepened, and for a moment, I was no longer the person I had been just seconds ago. I was someone else. Someone who had crossed a line I didn't know I'd even been standing on. Afterward, everything felt like a dream, as if I were watching it all from a distance. I stood there in the parking lot, my lips still tingling from the kiss, my heart pounding with the weight of what had just happened. I should have pulled away. I should have walked straight into my car and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, my mind clouded with confusion, my body betraying the part of me that wanted to do the right thing. I couldn't tell if I was afraid or excited, both emotions so tangled up together that they felt inseparable. But one thing was clear. Things would never be the same after that. The days that followed were a blur. We kept the affair a secret, as most affairs are kept. We spoke in whispers, exchanged knowing glances in the hallways, under the cover of work-related conversations. The guilt sat heavy on my chest like a stone, but there was also this strange pull, an addiction. It wasn't just the sex, though that part was addictive in its own right. It was the feeling of being seen, of being wanted in a way that had nothing to do with my obligations at home. It was the feeling of being desired for who I was, not for who I had to be for everyone else. And that was the part one didn't realize I had been missing. That was the part that kept me coming back for more. As the weeks went by, I found myself constantly thinking about him. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't concentrate on the mundane tasks I had once found easy. Every time I looked at him across the room, my heart would beat a little faster. And the guilt that once weighed on me so heavily began to fade into the background, replaced by something much more intoxicating. I was lost in this new world we had created, a world where every glance felt like an invitation, every conversation a secret shared between two people who knew they shouldn't be doing this. And in the quiet moments, When we were alone in the office, I could feel the gravity of the situation sinking in, but I was too far gone. I knew I had to stop, but I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to say the words that would end it. Until one day, everything changed. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just wrapped up a meeting with my boss when I noticed my phone buzz on the desk. A message popped up, from an unknown number. It wasn't unusual to get spam texts, but this one stood out. It wasn't the message itself, but the name attached to it, anonymous. At first, I thought it was a joke. A prank from someone who had somehow gotten my number. But when I opened the message, my stomach dropped. There was a photo attached, of me. Of us. It was taken in the parking lot that first night. The night we kissed. The photo was clear, intimate, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my face drain of color as I stared at the screen. The message beneath it was simple, but it sent a chill through me. I know what you're doing. In that moment, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The lies. The secrets. The affair I had thought I could control, that I had thought I could manage, was spiraling out of control. I had underestimated how quickly things could unravel. And now, I was trapped. That simple hug, the one I had convinced myself was innocent, had led me down this path. It was no longer just a mistake. It was a full-blown disaster, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending it was anything else. I couldn't breathe. Not because the air felt thick or heavy, but because the reality of what had happened, of what I had done, was crashing down on me like a tidal wave. That message. The photo. The undeniable proof that someone who knew, had seen us. Knew about the affair. Knew about everything. For a moment, I stared at the phone, my hands trembling as the screen flickered. I kept rereading the message, as though seeing it again might somehow make it clearer, might somehow change the words from "I know what you're doing" to something more innocuous, something I could brush off. But it didn't change. It couldn't change. The truth was there, staring back at me with cold eyes. I wanted to delete it, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but something in me told me I couldn't. This was the moment. The one where everything that had been building up, those stolen glances, the quiet touches, the secret meetings, came to a head. I stood frozen, the message still in my hands, as the weight of the world settled on my shoulders. The realization hit me like a hammer. I couldn't hide anymore. I couldn't run from the truth. The affair wasn't just a secret between two people anymore. It was something that someone else knew, and that meant I wasn't in control anymore. I didn't know what to do next. My first instinct was to delete everything. Every text, every picture, every trace of the secret that had been hanging between me and my coworker like a thin veil. But I couldn't. I couldn't destroy the evidence, not yet. Because if I did, it would mean pretending it never happened. And that, I knew, was something I couldn't live with. I took a deep breath and started scrolling through the messages again. Maybe I could find a clue, something, anything, that would help me understand who had sent this. Who had exposed us. Who had seen what was meant to be hidden. Then my phone buzzed again. I flinched, my heart pounding as I unlocked the screen. A new message. This time, it wasn't from the anonymous number. It was from him. "We need to talk. Now." My stomach dropped. The words were simple, direct, but they carried an intensity that made my blood run cold. My mind raced. What did he know? What had happened in the hours since we last saw each other? I could feel my thoughts splintering, running in 1,000 different directions. Maybe he knew about the message. Maybe the person who had sent it was one of his friends, or maybe it was someone at work, someone who had seen us together and put the pieces together. Or maybe it was just a coincidence. But even as I tried to convince myself that it was some kind of misunderstanding, I knew deep down that it wasn't. I stood up from my desk, my legs unsteady beneath me. My thoughts were a blur as I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. I couldn't stay in the office. Not like this. Not after everything that had happened. I tried to push the panic down as I made my way to the parking lot. Every step felt heavier, like I was walking through thick mud. My heart beat faster, each thud echoing in my chest. What was I doing? Was this the end of it all? Could I even go back now? Could I just walk away and pretend like this whole thing hadn't happened? But I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. As I got in my car and started the engine, the familiar hum of the motor did little to calm my racing thoughts. The city outside my window blurred as I drove, each turn a blur of streets I'd known for years. My mind was focused only on one thing, him. The man I had betrayed everything for. The man who had, until now, been a secret in my life. And now that secret was unraveling. When I arrived at his apartment, I didn't even wait for him to answer the door. I knocked twice, hard, before pushing it open. He was standing there, his expression tense, his eyes wide and alert, as if he'd been waiting for me. The air between us felt charged, thick with anticipation. "I got the message," I said, my voice shaky despite my attempts to steady it. "Who sent it? What do they know?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I hesitated, my hand still gripping the doorframe. I wasn't sure I wanted to walk into that space, into the apartment where we had shared so many secret moments. But I did anyway. I stepped in, and the door closed softly behind me. "Sit down," he said, his voice low. I didn't argue. I lowered myself onto the couch, suddenly feeling like I was sinking into it. I could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of the situation pressing down on me. "Who sent the message?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. I had to know. I had to understand how far this had gone, how much damage had already been done. He exhaled slowly, his eyes not meeting mine. He looked tired, drained. "I don't know. But it doesn't matter now, does it?" I blinked at him. "What do you mean?" "Of course, it matters. If someone knows." "They know," he cut me off, his voice quiet but final. "And that's not the problem." "What is the problem, then?" I demanded. I could feel my temper flaring, a mixture of fear and anger clouding my judgment. "You don't think it's a problem that someone has a photo of us? Of me? That someone is blackmailing us? Or is it just normal now?" He shook his head slowly, his gaze finally meeting mine. "The problem is that we've been lying to everyone, ourselves included." I froze. His words hung in the air like a confession. I hadn't expected him to say that. "Not like that." "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I'm not the only one who's been keeping secrets, am I?" His words hit me like a slap. The truth was that this wasn't just his fault. This wasn't just a mistake he made, or a lapse in judgment. It was mine, too. I had let it go on. I had allowed myself to believe that what we were doing was justifiable, that it was just a fleeting thing that wouldn't matter in the end. But now, as I sat there, facing the reality of what had happened, I realized how wrong I had been. The affair had never been just about him and me. It had been about a need, a craving, a desire for something more, something I felt was missing. But I had been selfish, blind to the consequences of my actions. The secret was never just between the two of us, it had always been one step away from being exposed, from being uncovered in a way that would change everything. "I'm sorry," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I never wanted this." But we both knew it didn't matter anymore. The silence in the room was suffocating. We sat there, barely a few feet apart, yet miles away in the space between us. The weight of the situation pressed down on me like 1,000 tons, and I couldn't escape it. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself that this was just a bump in the road, I knew better now. The truth had come to light, and there was no way to undo what had already been done. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and tight. His gaze didn't leave me as I sat on the edge of the couch, my fingers nervously tracing the seams of my jeans. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what could possibly make things better. How could you fix something that had been broken for so long without you even realizing it? He leaned back on the couch, running a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came from holding on to a secret for too long. His jaw was clenched, and I could feel the frustration radiating from him. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything. It was about how we had both been pretending, how we had both been living in a bubble of our own making, thinking we could somehow escape the inevitable consequences of our actions. "Why?" he asked quietly, his voice hoarse. "Why did you keep this from me?" The question hit me like a brick. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a plea for understanding. I could see the pain in his eyes, the hurt in the way he spoke, and it made my chest tighten with guilt. I had betrayed him. I had kept this from him for months, building a web of lies that was now unraveling in front of us. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought it was just a momentary thing, something I could control. I didn't want to hurt you." His eyes hardened, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. "And now?" I shook my head, unable to answer. The weight of his question hung there, unanswered. Could I still lie to him? Could I still pretend that this had all been a mistake, that I hadn't known what I was doing? Could I look him in the eyes and tell him that none of this was intentional? No. It had all been intentional, from the first time I let him touch me, to the first stolen kiss, to the moment we decided to continue this secret. But now, all of it felt like a distant memory, a dream I couldn't wake up from. It was no longer about passion, about the thrill of getting away with something forbidden. It was about the wreckage we had caused, the fallout from all the decisions we'd made in haste. I didn't want it to happen like this, I said, my voice shaky. I didn't want to hurt you. But I didn't know how to stop it. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You didn't know how to stop it? Or you didn't want to? The accusation stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in it. He was right. I hadn't been looking for a way out. I hadn't been trying to stop it. I had let it spiral out of control. I had let myself believe that it was just something temporary, something that wouldn't affect my life, or anyone else's, too deeply. I thought I could walk away from it at any time, but now I realized that was never going to be the case. I'm sorry, I said again, this time more firmly, as if those words could somehow bridge the chasm between us. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear. But he was already shaking his head, standing up abruptly, pacing around the room. The sudden movement startled me, and I stood up instinctively, my hand gripping the edge of the couch. My heart was racing again, and I could feel the heat of the moment building. Was he going to leave? Was this the end of everything? Was everything we'd shared, the good, the bad, the late-night conversations and the laughs, now just a casualty of my choices? I need to know everything, he said, his voice a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Every single thing. I need to know how long this has been going on. I felt my chest tighten at the weight of his words. How long had it been? How long had I been lying to him? How many months had we spent hiding our secret, pretending it was nothing when it was everything? I exhaled slowly, my breath shaky. It's been 6 months. 6 months. Half a year. It felt like a lifetime, and at the same time, it felt like it had happened yesterday. 6 months of sneaking around, of pretending. 6 months of lying to him and to myself. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at me, his face unreadable. I could see his fists clenched at his sides, his body rigid with tension. The silence between us was suffocating. It felt like we were both suspended in time, caught between the past and the future, neither one able to move forward. I don't know what you want me to say, I whispered. I don't know how to fix this. He finally spoke, his voice quieter now but still laced with pain. I don't know if it can be fixed. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. They stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He didn't know if this could be repaired. He didn't know if the trust we had built over the years could ever be restored. And in that moment, neither did I. I took a step forward, but he held up a hand, stopping me. Don't. Just, don't. I froze. His eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and sadness that I couldn't even begin to understand. You've hurt me in ways I can't even explain, he said, his voice strained. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. His words shattered something inside me. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that I was sorry, that I didn't want this to happen, but the truth was that I had already broken something between us. And I couldn't fix it. I need some space, he said, turning his back to me, his voice softer now. I don't know what to do with all of this. And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, alone with the consequences of my actions. I couldn't stay still. I couldn't breathe. Everything inside me was spinning, and I had no control over it. It was like being trapped in a storm, watching the winds tear apart everything you had once held dear, and realizing that there was nothing you could do to stop it. The house felt empty now. It wasn't just because of his absence, although that was certainly a part of it, it was because the very essence of what we'd built together had started to unravel. The walls that had once felt warm, comforting, now felt cold and oppressive. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet was a reminder of what I had destroyed. I had spent years building a life with him. I had been proud of what we had, and I had convinced myself that nothing could ever come between us. And yet, here I was. Standing in the ruins of my own mistakes, wishing I could undo everything, but knowing that I couldn't. Not anymore. I couldn't bring myself to look at the couch, where we had shared so many nights together, or the dining room table where we had eaten dinner, laughing about the small things. The memories of our life before this mess felt like a distant dream, one that I could barely reach out and touch. I reached for my phone on the counter. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe a text, a call, a sign from him that everything wasn't over. But there was nothing. I hadn't heard from him since he left, and the silence felt like a death sentence. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I dropped the phone onto the counter, unable to make myself reach out. What was I supposed to say? How could I fix this? How could I tell him that I never meant for it to go this far? That I had never imagined it would turn into this level of betrayal? There was a knock on the door, sharp and sudden, pulling me out of my thoughts. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I rushed to the door, praying it was him. But when I opened it, it wasn't him. It was Jason. I hadn't seen him since the last time he'd come over, the night everything had started. That night had been the beginning of the end, but I didn't realize it then. I hadn't seen how much it was going to cost me. How much it was going to cost us. Jason's smile faltered when he saw the look on my face. "Hey," he said cautiously, his voice betraying his unease. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face and pretend like none of this had ever happened. But that wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't fix what was broken. It wouldn't bring back what I had lost. "Can I come in?" he asked, stepping forward slightly. I stepped aside, letting him in. My eyes flickered to the couch where I'd been sitting earlier, alone with my thoughts. I didn't want him here. Not like this. Not when everything felt like it was falling apart. He shut the door behind him and lingered for a moment, watching me. "I came to talk," he said softly. "We need to talk." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I couldn't even look at him without feeling the weight of my own guilt. He had done nothing wrong, he wasn't the one who had betrayed anyone. I had let everything go too far, and now we were all paying the price for it. "About what?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible. His eyes dropped to the floor, his face clouded with uncertainty. About what's happening." The word stung, because I knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't here to apologize. He wasn't here to fix anything. He was here because he had to face the same truth I was avoiding. That what had happened between us was more than just a mistake. It was a choice. And now, that choice had consequences. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't know how to make this right." Jason stepped closer, his expression softer now. He didn't look at me with anger or disappointment, he looked at me like he understood, but that didn't make things any easier. If anything, it made everything worse. "You can't fix it," he said quietly. "Not now. But you have to face it." I nodded. His words cut through the fog in my mind. He was right. I couldn't fix it. It was too late for that. But I had to face it. I had to face the consequences of my actions, and I had to face the pain I had caused, not just to him, but to us. And that's when the real weight hit me, the truth that I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. The truth that I had been avoiding all along. I had betrayed him. I had betrayed us both. I let out a shaky breath, my body trembling with the force of my emotions. The shame and the guilt were overwhelming, suffocating. I had thought I could walk away from it all, but now there was no walking away. There was only facing the consequences. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Jason didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at me, his face unreadable. And then, finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending like nothing's happening." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. The weight of what he had said was too much to bear. We couldn't keep pretending. And now that everything was out in the open, I had to face the reality of it all. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, and I didn't try to stop them. I didn't try to hide the hurt or the guilt anymore. Because I knew that there was no way out of this. There was no easy way to fix the mess I had made. I had let the affair go on for too long. I had ignored the warning signs, pushed away the doubts, and convinced myself that it was something I could control. But now, as I stood here with Jason, I realized just how deeply I had been fooling myself. The truth was, I couldn't control anything anymore. "I don't know what happens next," I said quietly. "I don't know how to fix this." Jason's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw the person I had once known. But even that fleeting glimpse couldn't undo the damage. We both knew that things would never be the same. "I don't know either," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But we'll figure it out." But we both knew, deep down, that we might never figure this out. The days that followed felt like I was walking in a fog. Every time I moved, I felt like I was treading water, struggling to keep my head above the surface. Jason's words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over like a broken record, and no matter how many times I tried to shake them off, they wouldn't leave. "We'll figure it out." But the truth was, we hadn't figured anything out. Not really. Nothing could be fixed. The damage had already been done. I went through the motions, waking up each morning, going to work, and coming home, pretending like things were normal, pretending like I didn't feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. I went through the motions of a life that wasn't mine anymore, like an actor playing a part in a play that had long since stopped being meaningful. It all felt fake. My smile was fake. The small talk at the office was fake. The pleasantries between me and my friends were fake. I was fake. It wasn't just Jason I had betrayed. It wasn't just him I had to answer to. I had betrayed myself. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the person I wanted to be. I had become someone else, someone I didn't even recognize in the mirror. The person I saw staring back at me was a stranger. Every time I went home, the silence was unbearable. The house was too quiet, too still. Our things were still there, his toothbrush in the bathroom, the photos on the walls, his jacket hanging on the back of the chair, but it felt empty. It felt hollow, like a shell of something that had once been whole. And even though I had tried to tell myself that this was just a rough patch, that we could fix things, deep down, I knew better. The cracks were too deep now. They weren't going to heal. Jason called me a few days later. I hadn't answered the first time, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him. So, when the phone buzzed again, I picked it up. Hey, his voice was strained. I need to talk to you. I hesitated for a moment, chewing on my lip. I hadn't expected to hear from him. I didn't know what I wanted from him anymore. I didn't know what he wanted from me. Okay, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. What's going on? I'm leaving, he said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. I can't do this anymore. My chest tightened at the finality in his voice. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt relieved, like I was being set free from a cage I had built around myself. But the other part of me, the part that had been desperate to make things right, the part that had hoped we could salvage whatever we had left, was drowning. I wasn't ready for this. Leaving? I asked, my voice trembling. What do you mean? I'm moving out, he said, his voice steady but cold. I can't stay here anymore. Not like this. I can't stay in this house, with the memories of what happened. I can't. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't like I didn't understand. It wasn't like I wasn't the one who had started this entire mess. I knew why he was leaving. But hearing the words spoken aloud, hearing him make the decision that I had been avoiding, hit me harder than I expected. I had been holding on to the hope that we could work through this, that somehow, we could fix it. But the truth was, I hadn't been honest with myself. I hadn't been honest about what needed to change. I hadn't been honest about what we both really needed. Jason, please, don't do this, I whispered, the tears finally starting to spill down my cheeks. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But I want to make this right. He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the pain in the air between us. I knew he was hurting, too. But I also knew that the hurt wasn't enough to fix the damage that had been done. I don't know how to trust you anymore, he said finally, his voice cracking. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. And I don't want to live like that. His words were a punch to the gut. They were the truth. The painful, brutal truth. I had ruined everything. I had broken the trust that had been the foundation of our relationship. And no matter how much I wanted to go back and undo the things I had done, I knew I couldn't. The past was gone, and the future, whatever it was, would never be the same. I understand, I said softly, my voice filled with defeat. I really do. Goodbye, he said, the finality of the word ringing in my ears like a bell. And just like that, the call ended. I stood there for a long time, phone still pressed to my ear, as the world around me felt like it was collapsing. The silence in the house felt suffocating. There was no noise, no movement, no sign of life. I had no one to turn to. I had no one to blame but myself. As the days passed, I tried to hold myself together, but it was hard. I couldn't escape the memory of what I had done. I couldn't escape the way he had looked at me, the look of someone who had been betrayed, who had lost trust in the person they had once believed in. I knew it wasn't just Jason I had to apologize to. I had to apologize to myself. I had to face the truth of what I had done, even if it hurt. Even if it meant facing the person I had become, the person I never wanted to be. And so, I spent the next few weeks doing the hardest thing I've ever done, living with the consequences of my actions. There were no more lies, no more excuses. There was only the reality of what I had done, and the painful journey of trying to find my way back to who I used to be. But even as I worked through the pain, even as I tried to find a way to forgive myself, there was one thing I couldn't ignore. One thing I knew for sure. Things would never be the same again. And maybe that was the hardest truth of all.